Participants, my name is Maylin Flores Rojas. I work with FAO. Right now, I'm based at FAO headquarters in Rome, Italy. Before, I was working at the regional office for Asia and the Pacific, also with FAO. My area of work is on sustainable agricultural mechanization, looking at building profitable livelihoods, inclusive livelihoods, and resilient to climate change. I will be moderating today's webinar on a very interesting topic that I hope is going to be of use for us in trying to make us think on the different ways that we can improve our way of working when it comes to agricultural mechanization services, specifically when we talk about smallholder farming systems. I have with us, we have the speaker, Dr. Jelle van Loon. He is the mechanization specialist at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, better known as CIMIT. He also worked with FAO, specifically in Timor-Leste. We're working together in a couple of projects there. He has a doctoral degree on biosystem modeling, and he's also trained as an agronomist in the tropical regions. In his area of work, he tries to focus on mechanization and innovation that goes from low-tech solution up to precision agriculture. He also tries to think and rethink on ways in which he can build demand-driven innovation for agricultural sustainability and scaling. Just one tip, below or on the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A box. And in that box, please post your questions once you have them. And the chat box, you can use it to introduce yourself or to send greetings. So the webinar is going to be first Jelle presenting for about 30 minutes, and then we will have the Q&A, the question and answer session. We will try to cover all the questions, but if we don't get to answer all of your questions, we will try to get back to you via email or also via the community of practice that I'm also moderating on sustainable agricultural mechanization. Later on, I will post the website link to the community of practice in the chat box. With that, I think I have covered everything. Jelle, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. Thank you. Thank you, Mei-Ling, for the introduction, and thank you, FAO, for this space. Hello. Yeah, can you hear me? Should be on right now.
Yes.
Hello, hello. Okay.
Now it's okay.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, Mei-Ling, and of course, thank you to FAO for the space. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Happy to see you all connected. I'm connected here from Mexico, just early morning. So if the sun will flash in a bit over my face, don't worry. It's just start of the day here. As introduced, I will share with you during this webinar some thoughts and findings we had at CIMIT while reflecting on the efforts of 3 mechanization projects, one in Latin America, one in South Asia, and another one in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially from the viewpoint of the scaling impact we aimed for in these regions. To start, I feel it's important to situate CIMIT's cross-regional work on mechanization over the last years and explain a bit more the context and the long-term projects from which the presented insights were generated. As you can see here on the map, the projects represented in case studies are located in 3 different continents, with Masagro in Mexico giving a place to sustainable agricultural mechanization to working in what we call decentralized innovation hubs, where farmers are supported to overcome obstacles to improve agronomic practices. In Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, and Southern Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe, CIMIT worked on a project called FACASI for farm mechanization and conservation agriculture for sustainable intensification, looking at small-scale mechanization from a demand push and pull perspective to improve farm labor availability. For the research presented here, we focus on the Zimbabwean case in particular. Now, finally, in South Asia, as a part of the broader Serial Systems Initiative, CISA-MI in Bangladesh works to scale out access to surface water irrigation and appropriate mechanization through joint venture agreements with service providers and private sector actors. Now, although all three projects here took the principles of conservation agriculture as a starting point to sustainably intensify smallholder farming systems, 5 years ago, we realized, as discussed in Rural 21 magazine, that each region presented its different and specific challenges. And this discussion gave us the starting point to keep following up on the different evolutions and outcomes in our work cross-regionally. So trying to get our heads around how to reach scale in our projects, we started by focusing on the adoption of two-wheel tractors in smallholder systems, a prominent aspect in all three projects. During a workshop at Purdue in 2018, we got the chance to test our ideas with the opinion of other researchers and learned two things. First, that in essence, most people agreed that appropriate mechanization from a technology perspective was deemed as a proven solution to create positive change in agriculture. And second, that although our scaling ambition was to achieve uptake of two-wheel tractors by smallholder farmers, it was very quickly confirmed that in order to achieve our goals, we must ensure efficacy along the supply chain of the specific technologies or machineries offered, and include all relevant value chain stakeholders in our engagements, not only from an economic, but also from a collaborative standpoint. So interesting remarks during this workshop were to keep clear what successful impact looks like in the intervention areas, and to note that also negative impact is possible. The red pictograms here below, they show some of the possible negative effects at scale. And actively undertaking a responsibility check to review potential risk at scale can help to anticipate these undesired outcomes and adjust plans accordingly. For example, for the two-wheel tractor, positive outcomes can be increased agronomic precision compared to hand labor and rural employment, for example. But if not addressed properly and taking this into consideration, this can adversely create a risk of undesired job displacement. Okay. So trying to understand mechanization from a scaling perspective taught us additionally that scaling technology as multifunctional innovations, as is often the case for farm mechanization solutions, are often difficult to assess or monitor. So we chose to rather package them as a set of tailored solutions to facilitate the evaluation of the progress made by our interventions, as I will explain a bit later on. But also interestingly, although farm mechanization is often a very tangible technological intervention, across the case studies, the main bottlenecks for scaling mechanization were perceived to be of a non-technological nature. For example, access to finance or sectoral collaboration and facilitating adequate policy development and implementation. Okay, so with these lessons on the broader context of scaling, we reframed our scaling ambitions and understood that the common denominator in all three projects lied within the development and the rolling out of mechanization service provider models to improve smallholders' access to appropriate mechanization. And this mechanization packaged as a set of scale appropriate and tailored farm equipment. Now, triggered by the call of for the special issue on scaling of the Agricultural Systems Journal, we assessed this common feature in our projects, but under the realization that they originated from and were designed from a different starting point. And because of this, we wanted to gain insights to understand the sustainability of each of our interventions beyond the projects, whether certain aspects of the context of the intervention areas supported or hindered the success of impact at scale and how this could be anticipated. And while doing so, testing a method to improve reflection and enable timely adjustments in ongoing projects or during the planning phase of a new or follow-up activities in a certain area. To start, it's important to set out and define the differences and similarities between the mechanization service provider models in each case study country in terms of who is approached, what is the intended farmer group or user group, what is the minimum project requirement, what package of mechanization solutions are ideally offered, and what form of ownership is envisioned. Now, the three service provider models were defined as follows. Now, you can see here in Mexico, we had machine hire centers where a complementary income from renting out machines and associate services was envisioned. In Zimbabwe, it's more machine services that were stimulated as a complementary income for existing service providers, while in Bangladesh, it focused more on expanding existing professional machine service businesses. Now, these definitions represented significant difference between each model with, for example, the minimum upfront investment of the approach service providers and co-ownership in Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, which in Mexico was not an immediate prerequisite. Also, the profile of the approach service providers differed between case study models, as well as the size of farm operations and or intended client base and potential reach. Okay. Now, as for a framework to better understand the enabling environment required for adoption of the mechanization service provider models, we chose the scaling scan as proposed by Jacobs et al. In 2018. Now, this scaling scan allows to determine the strengths and weaknesses of the scaling ambition by considering 10 scaling ingredients, which you can see here listed up. The status of these scaling ingredients are assessed by answering 4 tactical questions per ingredient, which allows to evaluate the contrast or gaps with reality. So the 10 ingredients here, as you can see, technology, awareness, business cases, value chain, finance, knowledge and skills, collaboration, and finally, evidence and learning, leadership, and public sector governance. They're listed here, and by reading explanation of a few of them in the context of the proposed mechanization service provider models, immediately a broader panorama comes to light when questioning whether these statements are reached or not. So some come rather intuitively, like the business case and finance ingredients. Maybe a business case is make sure that there's an attractive financial economic proposition for companies, service providers, and other actors that should be in place to respond to the demand of mechanization services. So as I said, they can come quite intuitively, but others like awareness and demand or value chain might feel very natural, but responding on the status of these ingredients, are there truly effective links between value actors to pursue the business case for the mechanization and service providers? Well, it becomes clear that answering them might be trickier than it seems. Now, it becomes very apparent that by discussing these ingredients one by one, it allowed us to produce a picture on the enabling environment's readiness to scale our proposed interventions. So in the presented work, we applied the scaling scan by discussing these 40 tactical questions handling the 10 before mentioned scaling ingredients during 3 similar workshops, 1 per case study country, where we brought together stakeholders from 3 representative groups of people that were involved at some point during the project implementation. These were actors from regional governments, from private sector, and direct project collaborators. So this allowed us to paint a picture on the overall scaling status between countries and as perceived by actors from different levels of involvement within a country. No farmers or service providers were included during the study, as this would have required a serious adaptation of specific questions to ensure clarity in certain culturally related situations. And so we wanted to test our previous personal experience on this. We decided to replicate the exact same questions and procedures across countries without forcing translations and ambiguous misinterpretations, and included only the above mentioned stakeholders. We understand that in the next instance, it would be interesting to expand this to farmers and service providers. Nevertheless, even so in Zimbabwe, the participants felt necessary to assess the proposed mechanization service provider model models as individual cases when talking about shelling or planting service businesses due to perceived inherent different dynamics of both service economies. Okay, so in this slide, I'm giving the individual scorings received per question and per person during the workshops in Bangladesh and Mexico, just to have a quick look at what this looks like represented in heat maps. So as you can already see, there is a high fluctuation across countries between sample groups and even among individual participants, as quite expected. Now, although these heat maps can give us some indication of overall tendencies between countries and on certain questions or group of questions, more interestingly than the individual answers per questions are the resulting indicator scores taken as an average scoring of the 4 technical questions per scaling ingredient, as these fit better to reveal critical issues that need to be dealt with in order to induce a favorable scaling environment as a whole, in an attempt to address motivations between different perceptions among the sample group in the case studies. So in what follows, I'm showing in the next slide, I'm showing only the average ingredient indicator score and their spreads in order to visualize the overall tendencies from each case study. In general, it can be seen that people in Mexico give rather high scores, but have more divergent opinions compared to other country respondents, while Bangladeshi appear to be more conservative in their scoring or more skeptical on the progress achieved. Now in Zimbabwe, you can see there's 2 sets of box plots given, one for the planting and the other one for the shelling service models. But remarkably, only for the ingredients technology and business cases, results were significantly different. And this confirms our earlier intuition that although respondents were unaware of it, that for scaling and organizational innovation like the mechanization provider models, mainly the non-technological aspects of the proposed solution overshadow the more technical ones. Further, we can see that the scoring on the proposed technology or practice and the awareness on them are consistently high across the different countries, while finance scores is consistently low, indicating that access to effective and low-risk financing options remain perceived as low in all case study countries. Now, finally, in terms of public sector governance and leadership and management, contrasting opinions were found, identified by the broad spread of the box plots in these sections. So, with putting the average indicator score results divided per sample group, a couple of more interesting dynamics could be spotted. Starting with the fact that in most countries, answers between sample groups, they hover around the same value, which can be partially explained by the fact that all stakeholders have knowledge on the matter and had been primed during the introductory presentation of the workshop on the science of scaling. Now, interestingly, exceptions to this could be spotted in Bangladesh, where the government was clearly less convinced on the knowledge and skills and evidence and learning aspects of our scaling efforts, which could make sense as the approach here was primarily to involve private sector actors. Now in Mexico, the government had a contrasting and more positive perception on finance and public sector governance than the other stakeholders, which could be explained by the fact that no investment of the service providers was required in this particular service model, and that this was facilitated through collaboration with the government. Okay, now finally in Zimbabwe, it is the private sector actors that respond remarkably low compared to the other sample groups in the case of awareness on service provider models for planting, and similar for evidence in both models, which possibly reflects the lag response on some activities undertaking to lift these perceptions. Now, we reached a point that with this information on the indicator scores, we were able to discuss the scalability of the proposed mechanization models per ingredient. And if you allow me, I just try to give the main conclusions per ingredient across the case studies. So starting with technology and practice, we understand that the mechanization service provider models as an organizational innovation to make mechanization service accessible and affordable for smallholder farmers was perceived as very conducive to scaling, especially because the alternatives were less appropriate or efficient. Although adopting a mechanization service provider business requires technical and business skills. On awareness and demand, which was perceived as the least inhibiting to scaling, we could remark that although that we have to take care that access to information and effective communication are generally largely reliant on projects. Now in Bangladesh, we had a bit of an exception here, as here deliberate action was undertaken to link interventions with already existing machinery platforms and service provider arrangements. Now, thirdly, on business cases, so we understood that a mechanization service provider model can stimulate entrepreneurship and opportunities for machinery value chain actors, but only when attractive financial and economic propositions are available, and these are in fact prerequisite for successful scaling. Now, these business cases for farmers mean that they can reduce drudgery and production costs. For the service provider itself, it only works if they can generate enough income from clients year round and at a certain distance, at a certain limited distance, while machine distributors or dealerships only are interested if they can enter a new market segment and position themselves here. A couple of specific country results here was that Shelling in Zimbabwe scored quite higher on business case. And this is just a particular case where the technology of the intervention outweighs often the provision mechanism. Also, Mexico scored higher in the business case. And remember that here, no preemptive investment of the service provider was required. So here we have a point that it might create a misconception that the business is only about finding customers. Okay, now continuing to value chain, we noticed there was a high dependency on equipment suppliers and development of business skills. And because of the poor self-organization of value chain actors, CIMMET actively brings stakeholders together. Also, trade barriers and low population densities could negatively affect efforts to increase supply. Also, finance or access to low-risk finance is an important bottleneck to enter into service provider arrangements. Poor client information and lack of collateral hinder the development of financial products adapted to agriculture. Again, Bangladesh represents quite an exception here because of a tradition of rural microlending services, but it becomes more difficult when the farm machinery becomes more expensive to translate this into the same system. So also we saw that there was a need for prolonged engagement to turn farmer clients into real professional service providers. In terms of collaboration, in all cases, CIMMET actively brokered and facilitated collaborations among the different extension services, research partners, and governmental or local development programs. So collaboration with an active participation of financial and marketing services appear to be crucial, but still weak in all regions. Especially in Bangladesh, the lack of mechanisms to have organized associations to learn from each other is considered as a major bottleneck to scaling. Further, we could see that having a business, a mechanization service provider business requires the knowledge and skills in effective operation of farm machinery and in managing a business. And therefore, all case studies do deploy training material and provide capacity strengthening, but in different formats and at different levels. Now we understood that it is very critical to look for solutions to overcome these expensive and time-consuming activities through building improved national extension services, through installing after-sales services with machine providers, and to encourage vocational curriculums on national level. Now for the final three, I hope I'm not going too fast for you. We understood that to use the evidence and learn from this as provided by data and information that can be actively used to facilitate scaling processes, including analysis on geospatial information, which can match machinery with cropping systems, and also to measure progress of the implementation. Results in all three case studies, although indicate exponential growth over the project lifespan. But for scaling, the idea is to look beyond the project scope. Now, on leadership and management, again, we could see that the models proposed, they could benefit from leaders who position machinery in a broader context. Like, for example, as a part of climate smart agriculture or sustainable intensification practices. And this way, governments, they often host, a government host, sorry, they often support mechanization projects in this sense, but they do usually hesitate to lead the scaling efforts. Sample groups indicate that directly involved value chain stakeholders, they often also lack the incentive to coordinate sustained scaling efforts. And this suggests to a need for a continued effort to make appropriate mechanization more appealing. And last but not least, on public sector governance, all governments involved have recognized that mechanization is crucial for rural development. And in each case study, there was a good interaction with the agricultural ministries. Nevertheless, it became clear that continuity on the implementation of the mechanization policies as government change and adequately rolling out financing mechanisms are perceived critical for scaling. Okay, now as I'm wrapping this up for conclusions, allow me to split these up into two parts. The first part focusing on the potential of mechanization service provider models to catalyze a service economy around agricultural mechanization, where each project appears at least partly successful to develop a model suitable to the operating context and with potential to grow beyond the project boundaries. Common strengths among the mechanization efforts in the case studies can be summarized to having a strong focus on capacity development, supported by data-driven targeted interventions, stimulate active participation of value chain stakeholders and leveraging this to provide continuity, and of course, developing a better alternative to increase access to appropriate mechanization to smallholder farmers. While obstacles to overcome if aiming to reach impact at scale involve solving the transition from project to market finance, ensuring consistent supply of high quality mechanization services, and mitigate project dependencies to facilitate learning exchanges among stakeholders. Now, for the second part of the conclusions, we found using a tool like the scaling scan very helpful to organize and capture perceptions and progress of the interventions, as it provides clear pointers on how to adjust project implementation strategies for increased success. Some clear benefits are that it allows a better understanding of the interlinked dependencies between, for example, finance, governance, and ownership, and that the scan allows to visualize potential areas of opportunity and influence gaps. Yet it must be understood that the scaling scan does not provide or offer readily available solutions and requires more in-depth discussions to tackle the bottlenecks encountered. Finally, however, as for the cross-regional efforts of CIMMET on mechanization, it provided clear insights that local conditions and project design context are fundamental from a scaling perspective. And whereas 5 years ago, technologies were often adapted to make it fit, we understand that system change and sustainability of non-technological aspects are at least as important. Okay, so that was it. For my part, I hope you enjoyed this and thank you for your interest. I'm here and very curious to what questions you have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Yele. I think it was great. I think there's a lot of information that you just shared that can be of use for many of us working in projects, formulating them and implementing them in the field. We have one first question in the Q&A box. The question is, what will be the motivation for choosing a small mechanization based on power tiller instead of choosing animal traction or tractor, or a big tractor? Yes. Over to you, Yele.
Yeah, well, of course, there's always the question into what technology or what mechanization is the most adequate or most appropriate. You know, looking at sustainably intensifying farming systems, even in very rural conditions, looking at the difference between small tractors or animal traction, you can see there's a clear difference in how energy is being put to use. Now, an animal, you have to feed that animal all year round, and a draft animal is something that maybe you only use 2 weeks during a 2-week window to plant. So again, a farmer in that case would have to produce the fodder to feed the animal, while for a 2-wheel tractor, you only need the fuel during the time you use it. A couple of advantages of having a 2-wheel tractor are that, one, you can use it the instant you want, and for a myriad of activities, not only for planting but for threshing and attaching other equipment, just like in Bangladesh, they use it for surface irrigation. And two, compared to bigger tractors, they significantly consume less fuel. I have some experience here we have where it's up to 5 times less fuel. So again, comparing these things out, it might make sense to provide improved animal traction equipment in certain contexts, but we also have to think about the dependencies and the other externalities that mean working with animals. We saw what happened in Bangladesh, why this 2-wheel tractor became very popular was just at a time where there was a big famine, and even drought animals just didn't have food enough. They weren't available anymore. So in that sense, the 2-wheel tractors offered a big help to provide the necessary labor.
Thank you, Jelle. If I may add to what just Jelle mentioned, I will think about 2 things. One, local context. We always need to be conscious about our context in terms of landscape, in terms of land side. And also, I will add, we also need to be participatory. Let's talk to the users of these potential technologies. What do they aim for? And what is the market out there? One important aspect that we need to take into consideration as well is the availability of these technologies, together with the spare parts and together with the technicians that potentially needs to repair them once they break down. So all these issues and different elements, as mentioned by Jelle before, needs to be taken into account, because what we want to do is, once we work with certain mechanization, we want them to be running for a long term and aim at sustainability. Okay, let's go for a second question here. Thanks for posting the question in the QA box. So what is realistic time frame over which to expect a successful scaling? That's the second question, Jelle.
Yeah, an interesting question. I think something that we all ask ourselves often. In what condition you can, or what is the minimum time frame needed to reach scale? And obviously that's dependent on each region and each context. Now, I think that became clear in the presentation that it depends very much on where we are and what we're trying to do. Now, of course, scaling is not something that happens instantaneously, and it's a prolonged effort. As I mentioned, in Bangladesh, it's a continued engagement with the different stakeholders. But by understanding the gaps and things that go well, it might relieve a bit time to focus on things that aren't going well, or that offer an obstacle for scaling. So in this sense, by doing a scaling scan or analysis of the opportunities, might facilitate and catalyze the scaling efforts. I hardly think that we can provide a way to really push this through in a year or 2 years. No, so, but of course, with experience in the area, with a clear understanding of what, like Mei Ling is saying, of what the farmer demands are and what the needs are locally, I think you can facilitate and go quicker about than traditional project planning.
Great. So questions are popping up. Thank you for that. Jelle, another one is there any geographical distribution preferences for successful mechanization hire services models within each country? Will the hire services be more successful in the area with higher economic development level, or higher technology, or stronger public and private partnership, or research institute?
Yeah,
machinery
that's
manufacturing.
I'm reading it here as well. It's a very interesting question and a very adequate question. In fact, in Mexico, you have a very big diversity of farming systems. So you have in north very technified farmers, highly mechanized, while in the south there's many subsistence farmers still. And we see that there is a similar interest or demand or of appropriate mechanization. Now, in the north, it might be more on mechanization that allows to reduce production costs, while in the south, it's more on the improvement of basic tools. Now, I think here, besides the model, we have to look also at what is the package of mechanization solutions that is offered. Does it really open up an opportunity for the farmers to either reduce production costs or improve yields? Um, um, uh, we also, I think it's also interesting to look at how what are the distances from local areas, distances to highway accessibilities, and how we organize that supply chain towards it. So I think a point that we saw in that we see in different areas is the repair services and maintenance services, and that's why we focus so much on capacity development. So by understanding that you need to provide the whole value chain in place in a certain region, but with the adequate technology, I think you can work out a model based on providing service businesses in many different regions. Of course, again, it's dependent on what we're looking for, and help from research institutes or machine manufacturers can be a great help. You know, in the center of Mexico, we have a collaboration with national machine manufacturers, and they picked up some prototypes that we're developing for improved planting, and of course the distribution there helps a bit. So yeah, as a red line, I think I mentioned that this stakeholder engagement across the value chain is important, and also looking at the different sections of the supply chain is has to be continually taken care of in order to ensure that these business models can work in different regions. I hope that answers more or less the question.
Okay, another question from Dr. Fiaz Ahmad from Pakistan. He wants to ask if is there any relationship between climate change and agricultural mechanization? And then let me tell you another question so you can answer both perhaps. Is the scan allowing for generating guidelines for scaling through projects, or rather for self-sustained scaling dynamics? If the second is the answer, how?
Okay, so let me start with the climate change question. I like that one. And I think, well, agriculture mechanization or appropriate mechanization is often seen as a part of climate smart interventions or climate smart agriculture. So in that way, we see that that in certain areas where climate change is very severe, that our window of opportunity of certain on-field activities like planting or like harvesting is very a close window, very tight window. Now, in that sense, having mechanized solutions to facilitate planting does actually offer an opportunity to give good crop establishment and to work the available land in the limited time available. Also, in rain-fed systems where often people wait for the first rains to come, you know, you have that very short time frame where you need to put your crops into the fields, and there, of course, mechanization can help. Now also beyond climate change, I think these days, thinking about COVID, you know, about the Corona crisis, it became clear that in these specific moments, there's a very high pressure on available labor. And I think mechanization has to be seen from that perspective. You know, that it offers an opportunity to reduce the stress or the pressure on available labor and increase the farm power availability. I think that's one of the first points of mechanization, mechanization looking at using implements to make more efficient the work on the land. So in that sense, I think we have a good combo and of how mechanization can help in alleviating this. But of course, climate change is something that we should continue to monitor, and as climate smart solutions, mechanization can offer in different aspects, not also on the field, but also in post-harvest activities, a solution there. Okay, now the second question was a bit different topic, whether scaling has to be seen as part of the project or more in a self-sustained way. I think here what we're trying to explain is that it has to be considered as both items. I think it's important to look for your intervention to be able to scale spontaneously. Because that's exactly what you want to have when you do a project in an intervention area and the project stops. You don't want it just to stop the activities or to fall. You want something that can be picked up and remain active. So in that way, I think projects have to be planned in a way that you have an exit strategy. What happens when you leave? Does the contact stop? Does the interaction stop? And that's why I emphasize the part where we need to ensure that there are exchange platforms between the stakeholders in the value chain before the end of the project. We need to make them comfortable talking to each other and learning from each other. And I think here that's the challenge. So it's part of a project to understand what are you scaling, what's the scaling potential, but it's also a responsibility of the project to prepare for this exit strategy and make the intervention able to scale, to be self-sustained scaling.
All right, there is a participant raising hands, but first let me go with one question that was posted before. What were the criteria for selection of the mechanization service providers as means of sustainability?
Yeah, a couple of different strategies are handled. I showed that in one of the slides. It depends a bit on different regions. In Mexico, it was more looking at farmers or service providers that had a minimum infrastructure to keep their machines safe and protected, to have minimal skills of administration, and a starting client base to do the service provision. While in Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, it was a bit more. It's a bit different. They were looking more at people that were rural entrepreneurs, close interaction with farmers, and had an interest in becoming professional service providers. Of course, also, just to add quickly, the context of what is perceived as smallholder farmers, it changes a bit from each region. So in Mexico, we did open it up a bit and understood it as service providers that attend to farmers that have less than 20 hectares, while that for Bangladesh is obviously a big farmer. So in Bangladesh, average area of farms for smallholder farmers is often less than 1 hectare. So of course, this also changed a bit in choosing our service providers in each country.
Okay, let's give now the opportunity to one participant to talk because he raised hand. That's also an option. Dear participants, Scott, would you like to talk as you raise hand? You are muted.
Hey.
All right. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Scott. Please keep it short so we can answer all the questions of most of them. Thank you.
Yeah, I just appreciate very much. First off, this chance you and FAO and everyone is given a chance to get a bunch of people together to discuss an important topic like this. And I see this scaling business as so many, multi-headed beast actually, and Yele is, talking about, just trying to get the partners to discuss and work together. I mean, that alone, and without that, you don't get scaling. And but to do that many times just takes so much effort and so much resources that many projects don't have. And I just wondering, I know a little bit about the African project, and I know a lot about the Bangladesh program and the Mexico programming. I know that you're all using the more of a, I think, cooperative CHC effort there, and just wondering how well you feel the CHCs are working in Mexico. I really don't know much about it. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Scott. Well, in Mexico, like I said, the model changes a bit because we don't require ownership from the service providers that we approach. Instead, the Masagro project, they provide the machine package, and the objective there is to teach these rural entrepreneurs how to manage the machines, how to manage the service provision itself, and administrator this. So we see that we had, and it's also in the published article, we see that through this effort there is a bit higher disadoption rate through the years. So the first years people did it for a year, and then they said like, it's not really my thing, because they didn't have an investment to pay for it. No, they were freely to come and go. Now, by understanding the profile of these actors, we were able to close in more on a profile that is more keen to working with this, and we found that it's usually like farmers that are already providing some kind of informal service to neighboring farmers. Now, also, we also understood that the selection of the machines was very important as to create a value or a valuable tool for these service providers, and make them understand that it's actually a working equipment to push them further into a business of attending other farmers. So in a certain sense, we were quite happy with the results we saw in Mexico, because we were able to learn those dynamics and see the profile. And additionally to that, we asked the service providers to register all their movements. Now, it's in another format we presented these results a bit, but it's very interesting to see these movements and understand dynamics, how far they go from their own farm, how many farms they attend, and see which machines are like the most desired ones or the highest in requests. So beyond the model itself, and understanding that we made a risk of not requesting the initial starting investment of the service providers, and therefore maybe lagged a bit behind in the first 2 years as we learned this dynamics. It was very interesting for us because we gained a lot of information of what machine is used where, on what kind of land, and in what kind of farming, in what kind of combination with the production system. So in that sense, I think it was a good experience, and especially interesting to compare these efforts with the approach used in Zimbabwe and Bangladesh. But thank you for the question. Was good.
Okay. Was there any difference in technology adoption between men and women farmers? What were the major factors in differences in adoption, if any? And another question a bit related to that, Jelle, what is the relative importance, in your opinion, of joint or collective action from the farmer's side? Does it correlate directly to the extent to which scaling mechanization could be successful? Okay.
Okay, so we didn't in this study, we didn't really look at the gender difference between farmer adopters. So we looked mainly at how service providers were able to establish themselves in a certain area when provided the tools and the knowledge to operate a service business. So I'm afraid I don't have factual data on whether uptake between men and women was more or less. If I recall correctly, in the Fakasi project in Zimbabwe, we do have a special focus in another branch on it, looking at women arming the service provision. And I think the idea was there, as they are more involved in farm decisions and follow up and make more decisions for where the farm income goes to. I think that was a interesting approach, but I don't have exact data of whether men or women farmers had a bigger uptake on that. We'll have to look in that and maybe produce a next paper on that, on the adoption, on that gender-related adoptions. Now, the second question, you lost me a bit while I was thinking on answering this one. Can you remind me?
Yes. So the question is, if there is any relative importance, in your opinion, of joint or collective action on the farmer side. Does it correlate directly to the extent to which scaling mechanization could be successful?
Yeah. Okay. Very good question, and I think the answer is yes. No, that's what we're trying to show there. Again, the stakeholder engagement, it involves farmers, and I think we saw that in all the different projects, that as we as we explain farmers on the potential benefits of using the appropriate mechanization, you create a demand for these services. Now you need to have a certain demands per region to be able to establish these service providers. Now, one of the critical points for the service providers was to have clients year round and have them sufficiently close to where your operation is based. So of course, having these joint collaborative initiatives, starting from a farmer's perspective or farmer cooperatives, is very interesting to leverage this. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so there's another question. It's always come back. How can we link landless farmers with mechanization? And it's another one a bit related to that one. How the landless farmers are joining and getting benefit from agricultural mechanization. Is that agricultural mechanization really useful for landless farmers?
Okay, well, I think in this viewpoint of creating rural employment, I think landless farmers can have an opportunity to get more involved again. So having them and transform them into service providers gives them an opportunity to have an income on agriculture. I think that's the main idea there. It also gives a bit more the opportunity of people that live in townships, that maybe are not that maybe not have a tradition of father or grandfather working on the land. Just by giving them, by offering them the opportunity to learn a new skill set, it might attract them back to the field. And that's a bit the premise that we're looking at, how to make it attractive, how to provide employment, which is of course a bit more skilled labor, but it can also set aside this additional income generated from agriculture.
Okay, we have another hand raised. Joseph, please.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Joseph Kienze also from the FEO here in Rome. Good to see you, Jelle. It was a good presentation. Let me play a little bit of advocate. I mean, I wonder if projects are the right solution for enhancing mechanization service providers, or could it not be that we need to advise governments and private sector, actually all actors, and to create the environment to have long-term mechanization service provider services, and instead of investing in relatively short-term projects. And second question, if I may, on the tractors again, I wonder, I know that CIMIT two-wheel tractors are kind of a part of your policy, kind of, but what about the user comfort, and what about instead the low horsepower four-wheel tractors, couldn't that be an alternative? And why are so little of them on offer? I mean, what is the role of the machinery suppliers in this context, beside the mechanization service providers? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. I think two very interesting questions. And I think the first one, whether projects really are a solution to scaling mechanization services, I think I wouldn't put it as harsh as you're saying right now, but more, I think the presentation was trying to make clear that it's important to go beyond focusing on the technology itself, but really use the project to leverage these engagements with machine distributors, with even financial service providers, and governments. I think one of the points that came out of the workshops about the scaling scan was exactly that governments or these local actors usually don't have enough incentive to get organized and to push through sustained scaling effort on mechanization. It's a bit fighting each other for their market position and having quick wins on sales. So I think in that sense, and that's what we tried very hard in Bangladesh, to really look at those public-private partnerships, look at those joint agreements with the private sector, where we can catalyze the scaling efforts. So in that sense, I agree in part with your statement that maybe there's a need to rethink how traditionally technology-based projects operate, and look more at the enabling environment and how we organize the different actors and different steps needed to produce this beneficiary uptake over increased uptake of the adequate technology. And I think, well, yeah, higher services is part of it. Often the capacity building on training, on operation is one thing, but having rural entrepreneurs understanding business administration and business development, I think that's the next step that we can tackle in new and more innovative projects. Now, thinking back on your next question on the two-wheel tractors, yeah, it's been for a while. It's been one of our let's say one of that topic that or technology that attracted a lot of our interest. And I think in the beginning of the presentation, I also said that that was our starting point. Now, the two-wheel tractors, we have them in all the regions. They're readily available. But again, as we continue to talk about this, that although we agree that this is useful equipment, I don't think we're scared of looking at other technologies. On the contrary, in Mexico, we're not focusing at all on two-wheel tractors in areas where it's desired and requested. We try to organize that, but we also look at four-wheel tractor implements. And in that sense, yeah, tractors that always have to do with farmers wanting to be comfortable or wanting to have the status of driving around with a four-wheel tractor on the field. That's something that you can't deny. There's a certain socioeconomic status there. There's certain proudness of the farmer having that equipment. But it's then about the investment cost and the feasibility of the investment. So again, I think in India, in certain parts of Latin America, there are very interesting small four-wheel tractor equipment that might fit into these appropriate packages, as long as they can be acquired at low costs, as long as they can remain efficient, and again, the whole maintenance services can be organized. Now, to finalize, of course, it's not only about the tractors. No, it's not only about the farm power force or the farm power delivery or the power takeoff. It's also about the machines that are attached to it: seeders, fertilizers, direct seeders, precise fertilizers, even shellers and harvesters. And we also look into that, and that's why I mentioned these mechanization solution packages, as into what is an interesting package from a service provider standpoint to have work all year round, or at least all production cycle around. So having the ability to offer services while planting, 30, 40 days later is fertilizing, and at the end of the cycle being able to harvest and maybe process and do some shelling, it offers a broader time frame of the service providers to work. So obviously these attachments, these accessories are very important, that they match the power source and then match again the demand and the scale of the operation of the farmers. So yeah, thanks Joseph for this interesting questions. I hope I was able to answer this satisfactory.
Yes, I'm looking at the time and it's 4:02. So I think it will be it for today. We didn't have the time to answer all the questions. We will try, as I said, to answer you via email or via community of practice. I would like to thank, of course, Jelle for a very nice presentation and for your time and for sharing with us your paper and your thoughts and your experience. Thanks to the participants for being so active. There were so many questions that we didn't have time. I think we're going to continue organizing webinars. If you feel you want something, you have some experience to share, some papers, some work, please come on, write to me and we can organize something together. Thank you to Viviana, which is behind stage, and she makes possible all this to happen. So thanks, Viviana, thanks to FAO and CIMI for collaboration. Thank you, have a nice afternoon, nice day, and bye-bye until the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, take care, bye.